Good afternoon. Hope you're all good. Got a interesting show lined up for you. Pulled a few of your recent questions that have been coming in on various channels. Some people like to send them secretly, DMs and emails and stuff, and others more public. But thanks for joining. If this is tuning it over, we go weekdays at lunchtimes, 12:30 till 1 o'clock, and we talk about whatever's topical. And so I'm just going to visit a few of your questions, but some of them are particularly interesting, and I've had so the ones that I'm going to share with you today. The three key things I'm going to do over the course of the next half an hour. Obviously, feel free to send your questions in as we go, and maybe we'll get to them now or in the future. But what the questions that I've picked out are ones that certainly provoke conversation and further might even be further topics in themselves. But also, I think if we can risk it, at least briefly, we'll try and have a bit of a cameo. For those of you that don't know, me and my wife Charlotte had identical twin boys. We got them home on Christmas Eve of last year. It's been a bit of a different year for them than we were expecting. The babies have locked down, but we had twin boys. We call them, on the internet at least, we call them Test and Control, born on the 20th of December. Now, the reason I mention that is because one of the questions that I got in is saying, has becoming a parent, because these are my first children, and so has becoming a parent changed my perspective on anything? And they weren't specific. It didn't mean perspective on anything in healthcare and MSK, in my work or whatever. They were just saying in general. And so I thought that we'll visit that question first, and then bravely, just because they happen to be enjoying some baby sensory in the gym at the moment, because the clinic's closed today, and so I thought we would try and get them in and involved. So let's see. I mean, this might be brave. It might not work too well, but let's get Test and Control on camera for a little while. Look at that. Who's that? Who's that? Look. Who's that? Brilliant. So hopefully you can still hear me. Drop us a message if you can. Drop us a message if you think these two are a bit cuter on screen than I usually am. I think what we're going to do, I'm going to put you on my knees. I don't know if I trust you on my desk. Let's tilt the screen a little bit. Right. Let's at least try and answer the first question. What's this? First question with them in situ. You play with Daddy's microphone. Right. So, yeah, we had these two. These are about 9 months old now. And certainly, yeah, it changes your perspective on all things in terms of life, etc. But one of the things is that I don't buy the fact that it sometimes shifts people's entire productivity and worldview in a broad sense. And so I think what I'd want to admit to is that they don't necessarily, especially these two, they interfere with, in positive and negative ways, everything about what you do. And so essentially, much like they are now, a very valuable distraction. They keep all things in perspective. But I would also say that the fact that they don't sleep very well certainly throws off your ability to do things that aren't a priority, like in work sense, right? It sharpens your focus in a project sense, doesn't it? And I think that realistically, although fortunately they're rarely in practice, literally with me now, having to try to be parenting whilst broadcasting, but it's a good metaphor or analogy of just how they're a handful. And so what people are asking when they say, has it changed my perspective? I would say on a life level, yes, absolutely. Of course it does. It also makes you a little bit more thoughtful about, I suppose, you're not thinking about what sort of world you're trying to create for you and yours or future. You think about the future, you think about family, think about potential children. But until they're here, you don't really think about what that would be. It sort of it has sharpened my passion for helping to create a better world, a healthier world, and obviously healthcare and education are at the heart of what I do. And so it only sort of sharpens that instinct. But then I would say that it also makes me frustrated about the fact that sometimes people want to leverage the fact that they're parents as if it somehow strengthens their points or arguments. I've seen it done, and I've tried not to make sure I don't end up succumbing to it, where people will say, speaking as a father of young children, I think we should build more houses on the green belt. right? What on earth's that got to do with it? What was it a weird appeal to identity as a parent that somehow strengthens your point or softens the opponent's argument? I hate that. So I'm trying not to succumb to that, and I hate that when that happens. But I also can't pretend that it doesn't really shape the way in which we all go about things. And I'm not surprised that people are interested in my take on that. Now, how well I'm answering that question whilst wrestling them, I don't know. But they're pretty happy, but certainly getting stronger. They're crawling around now. I think as well. I think it will influence me more when they end up. I think when they start engaging in sort of sport as well, I think that's going to throw it. That's going to be a more specific thing with regards to how it affects me in the industry. I think it's going to be a big difference when they start to be more active in that way. I think that would be a really interesting thing to see, and probably one that we can revisit as these guys get older. And maybe it won't be their last cameo. I think we'll leave it there from their cameo. So this is Test and Control, our identical twin boys. One of the favourite things we have as well is people often asking, are they twins? It's like, I don't know if they weren't twins, then they must be clones. I don't know if you guys can tell them apart, but even I struggle sometimes. Oh, I think it's good timing. Right, let's hand you back off to number one parent. Thank you very much. Thanks, boys. Cheers, Sha. Yeah, take the party lights as well. Nice one. Thank you. Well, that actually went better than I thought it would. Bit of fun. Seen a few comments coming in, especially thanks, Matt, a friend of mine, Matt Fox, local physio and collaborator, saying very brave. Yeah, brave. It might have been stupid. I don't think that was my finest of answers, but yeah, thanks to those of you sending lovely comments. These on Facebook about Test and Control's little cameo there. What I would add to that is I'm not going for a second pretend that it doesn't completely change everything about you, and I'm not surprised that people have said that. I'm not, it's not something that I didn't see coming. But I think that one of the things I was frustrated to be accused of historically was that the things that we'd done with Physio Matters, or the passion that we had for reform within Choose Health, or trying to change the industry at large through MSKR, is that I was saying that as a 20-some relatively young man who was childless, that was then more frequently than you'd expect accused of that being a privileged position in terms of the time I had available to be able to then make that noise and aspire to that change, because people were suggesting that what we were doing, what we were creating, what we were focusing our time on was all not central to clinical work, and that any of the projects or teams I was managing or volunteers that I was trying to work with, that essentially that was all that would be by the wayside. So when people who had families were sometimes in a reasonable way, and sometimes quite bitterly, suggesting that it's all well and good you saying that when you've got all this time on your hands. And they were sometimes ignorant to other family circumstances for elders that might have needed to be cared for. They had no knowledge or interest in what else we had going on. But it was this notion that family completely throws all that. Now, in many ways, of course, I understand that it totally changes your time dynamics and stuff like that. But I hope that we're continuing to prove that the number of ways in which we've gone about things since we've had children, I don't think it means that it focuses your attention, don't get me wrong. But generally speaking, I don't think it's a fair argument to have suggested that was therefore going to slow me down, quieten me down. It's certainly something that if I'd have tried to do everything, or if I was still pursuing, say, fitness in a hobbyist sense, of trying to perform or be an athlete again, or if I was trying to balance too many things, then it certainly wouldn't. But the way in which it was sometimes framed as if to suggest they were going to see me fall off a cliff, or the projects that we do, or the public advocacy that we do, that almost sort of the non-profit with the charity work through MSKR, etc. We're going to see that fall by the wayside when we had children. I think if anything, especially in the midst of the pandemic, we've really tried to step up there with things like Therapy Live, MSKR.info, the Rehab Recruits campaign. So I just want to mention the fact that was sometimes a misreading, and certainly something that we want to try and make sure that we don't get negatively affected by that, in a sense that we've built something that we feel does a real good public good, and we want to try and keep that up. And so, fortunately, between me and Charlotte and various enterprises that we're involved in, I think it's hopefully enhanced and sharpened our focus. And I think the point that I made about, when you've got tangible children, you can imagine that you aspire to a better future for them in such a way that makes you that little bit more thoughtful about what that might be, and a bit more applied in what you're doing. I think that their experiences and the fact that your exposure to education is going to be different when you've got children in education and things like that. It's going to really, I think, it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. And as I said, on a professional level, if they go into sport or start to get injuries and all that sort of stuff, and experience the oohs and ahs of pain in different ways, rather than just teething and bumping their head now and again, or when their brother bashes them with a truck or what have you. So it's going to be interesting. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed that little cameo from them. And many thanks to those of you that have shared, especially to Zoe Johnson, who said, Zoe Johnston, mum of twins here too. You see, the twin community, we find each other, don't we? We just, it's a special thing being a parent of twins as well. That is a bit of a niche that's been fascinating to see, and it really is a quite interesting difference, I would say. We don't know any better in many ways, but it certainly has been quite unique. So yeah, hi Zoe, and yeah, thanks a lot for your comments. So I'll move on to a couple of the other questions that we wanted to cover. One of which was a really interesting one that came in, which admittedly could be a show in itself, which is what do I feel are, let me try and remember how it was worded. Let me just open it up. I think I put it in the description. It was sort of the promising and frustrating aspects. Let me just have I really enjoyed how it was worded, so I just want to make sure that I get that right. Where is it? What are the most promising and most frustrating things in MSK right now? Yeah, I think that was a brilliant one and really well worded. So the most promising things for me is that despite the situation and the flux that we find ourselves in society, attention being focused on health in a really positive way, but also it's really challenging to try and the systems that surround everything we're doing are in flux. But the thing I'm most promised by is that the endeavor for people, particularly volunteering within projects that are trying to solve problems. So I've seen like a digital entrepreneurship spike in a massively interesting way. Now I've got some of those things that I'm biased to because I'm closer to them, that like internal projects that we've been doing and working with people on that I'm going to mention. But there's also other things that I'm seeing where if you go to say Nerdy Physios, or you see Evie and some of what she's doing with the online physio side and Get Better Online, these are projects that it would have been so easy for people to sort of capitulate under the weight of change in such a way that they'd just think, I've got these ideas, but I just want to wait until sort of the chessboard's at least back on the table. The disruption sort of settles down a little bit. But instead, people have really endeavored to get stuck into project work in such a way that I really didn't see happening. I almost look to myself and think, especially with the circumstances we found ourselves in early in the pandemic, having really young babies and the challenges that we faced with the disruption economically to all of our businesses, is that would I have really kicked on with some of the projects we were doing, or embryonically started them if that was from scratch, if we didn't already have a platform or infrastructure doing so? And I really don't know. I don't know if I'd have had the bravery or the skill or the wherewithal or the passion under so little sleep. But the fact that some folk have has been brilliant. So yeah, like I mentioned, there's just a couple of them there. If you watch some of the stuff they're doing on Instagram, the Nerdy Physios, and building interesting design-laden infographics to people's minds, as well as I said, with Evie Martin, and check out her stuff with online physio, Get Better Online, that sort of stuff where they're leaning into highlighting the benefits and virtues of virtual rehab. But then also internally, we've got so many projects that I could mention. One of them being, and thing that I'm most interested in, most promised by, is that our First Steps group, which is Physio Matters First Steps. If you haven't found them, then Google that and you'll find them on social media, and they've got some great stuff coming up. But they are essentially trying to improve the student and new graduate, so your first steps within MSK, and basically trying to help speak a language that sort of resonates with that side of things. Because, you know, I can't pretend you try and keep your finger on the pulse, but fundamentally now, as I celebrated last week, you know, it's 10 years in practice, and so I can't pretend to be as close to what the freshers are thinking as I used to, you know, and so let's not pretend, and instead let's try and involve those people. And so we've got a team of students and new graduates that are working on the Physio Matters First Steps project, and the endeavor that they're showing, and it's not just them, you know, there's other projects like it and adjacent to it, but even internally within our businesses, we've got new mentoring services, what we've done with Therapy Live. I'm just watching my team step up at a time where you could so understand people being sort of blasé and things. Now, there are reasons for that and other people being less productive, and I don't want to suddenly think that then, you know, I'm judging them for not being, but people asking me directly, what do I find most promising in MSK? It's the fact that there's so many interesting and diverse projects going on, and some real people speaking passionately about what they want to be doing. Now, they're going to face challenges in the fact that they've got new infrastructure to try and navigate, or a disruption to existing infrastructure. But then there's also opportunity that knocks there, where some of the things that sort of maybe would have put ceilings in over them aren't there. So it's going to be really interesting to see, especially for those newer projects. As long as they can sort of find a way to sort of self-manage and grow themselves, then I'm excited to see what happens. As for what is most frustrating for me at the moment is possibly related to that, with regards to infrastructure and policy, is that the inability, it's almost like a really frustrating "I told you so." So my analysis broadly of the MSK industry at large and the sort of governance structures and all that sort of stuff has been like, we were so vulnerable. I mean, the world was so vulnerable to an incident like this pandemic, and I can't even call it an incident, an ongoing pandemic. But the way in which we, in healthcare, but particularly in MSK, we're just so vulnerable to inaction, right? We didn't have the governance structures or the maturity of leadership to be adaptable quick enough, you know. And granted, you've seen that all the way up, you know, throughout and into politics. But it's just that the way in which we'd selected for, I would argue, leaders that fundamentally were just particularly talented at towing a line, and not realizing how entrenched they were within bureaucracy. Sometimes even fancy themselves as change agents, but fundamentally what they're initiating is changes and tinkers within a system, rather than on a fundamental level recognizing, acknowledging, and publicly speaking openly about some of the weaknesses. So they're almost conditioned to deflect. Now, I can unpack that in another show if you're interested. I know we have some questions that came in about, you know, what is your beef with #leadership, which is something I rail against. And this is sort of what I'm leaning on here, is that when asked as to what my key frustration is that the entrepreneurial projects I'm most excited about, I know what forces can sometimes stifle them, and it's some of the forces that have really stopped the adaptability, the intersectional working that could occur between disciplines and between sectors, as we talked about yesterday. The things that are barriers to that are sometimes policy level decisions, as well as then the leaders in those positions just aren't as adaptable as they could be. And so my key frustration is linked to my key thing that I think is promising, is that one of the things that might stifle those is just the ignorance sometimes, or just I think the way that we've just selected for our sort of our leaders, or the systems even in which the leaders operate. You know, it just sort of frustrates me. I think that it's such a myth that there's a truly meritocratic way in which that's selected for, and I just think that there's been so many places for them to hide. It's been quite an exposing moment. I'm sure many of them are sort of showing their colours of not being as strong as they may be masqueraded as, because of the circumstances we've been presented in. And again, it's not all on them as individuals. It's just that there's this system. I don't think we really anticipated just how vulnerable it was. So there it is. My thing I'm most promised about is this entrepreneurship project diligence and productivity that's been going on, and some examples I've given. And then the frustration is the infrastructure, some of which has been disrupted, and probably some of it needs to be, and the personnel that perpetuating that, massively frustrates me. And if you're interested in all of my thoughts about not just what it is on analysis, but also how we might reform it, then yeah, of course, check out some of the stuff on MSKR, of which I've got news later today. And Matthew Wyatt's going to be joining me tomorrow to talk a bit more about MSKR's future plans as we celebrate our birthday. MSKR being the grassroots think tank designed to reform MSK practice. So that's enough about that question. The third one that we're going to visit, I'll come to your comments in a second. I've not had them on screen because they're so distracting, but thanks for that. Actually, I'll just check as to whether or not anyone's weighed in on what I've said. A few more comments there about the kids. That's lovely. Thanks a lot, Chris. How are you doing, mate? Hope you're well. Need to get Chris Kitson on this show. Actually, he'd be a brilliant voice. Unless it's a different Chris Kitson than I'm thinking of. But anyway, whichever Chris Kitson. Could the real Chris Kitson please stand up? Thank you for your comment. That's lovely. Evie Martin. Oh, she's watching. Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Evie. She heard her name and projects being mentioned. That's brilliant. And then Evie's then said, lack of adaptability is quite stifling. Yes, experienced a fair bit of this. That is concerning, of course, but I'm sure she'll plow on. Exciting to see what she does with it. Right. So the third thing I was going to visit was a question that's like, do online events have legs? Is how I think it was worded, but it's kind of like how I understood it was that what's the sustainability of the online events? Like if the world returns to some sort of normal, when we can gather in groups of hundreds or thousands of people at conference centres or at lecture halls across the world, then will online events just, will people be breathing such a sigh of relief to get off Zoom and equivalents? And I think that was pointed to me naturally because I'm someone that through always very involved in digital education, but we tried to interface that with some in-person content. We ran events. We have a studio here with 4 microphones in it, and only one of them gets used these days. But essentially, we value that in-person interaction as well for education and conversation. But we also we run Therapy Live, which is a online conference, which is different in many ways, but it's kind of has its in-person equivalents at conference centres across the country at various times a year normally, and at the moment they can't operate. So people are asking me that question. I think they will have legs unless they make the mistake of constantly trying to just simply emulate in-person events. Now, fundamentally, I think there's some hypocrisy there in a way with what we did with Therapy Live, whereby because of the timeframes, etc., is that we delivered majority, apart from in the MSKR room, we actually had majority sort of webinar delivery, which was emulating in many ways, apart from using the digital interface and some of the interactivity. It fundamentally was a bit more didactic in terms of its education delivery, like you might have done with keynote speakers. But that's purely a time thing. And as you'll see at Therapy Live Sport, which is happening on 9th of November, no, it's not, 7th of November, you got more of a mixture, panels and using the audience interaction, using some of the polling features more, and leaning into some of the things that we could do on the digital space that you just wouldn't be able to do in person. Also, don't underestimate the fact that you've got the better access. It feels good for me to be able to go to speakers that have turned up for 2-day events and conferences for us before and are fantastic for doing so. The fact that I'm going to them and saying, can I have a favour and take up 90 minutes of your time over the next 2 weeks, in a couple of months' time, rather than me saying, do you mind giving up a weekend? It's a different phenomenon, and therefore means that I've got a huge pool of talent that therefore the logistics make it easier for as everyone gets more comfortable. So don't underestimate that. That's not going anywhere. But I think that the longevity of it in terms of the fact that it won't just be for the sake of novelty and for the fact that everyone's stuck behind their computer screens, I think that the online events, as long as they adapt sensibly, are going to be the true future, especially in terms of the volume of people that we can visit. We're confident in saying that at 22,000 registrations, over 20,000 people turning up on the day, Therapy Live was the biggest MSK event ever. And there's been some massive MSK events. You think things like WCPT attract, I think, not dissimilar numbers to that, but it's not an MSK event. And then if you got the iFont versions, I was involved in iFont 2016 in Glasgow, which was massive, but it's certainly not as many MSK therapists as we had at Therapy Live. Now, there's reasons for that, and I totally understand it. Doesn't diminish that event, but when they can't happen, yeah, we've got this going on. But as long as we don't think that there's got to be some things you can do in each platform, each style of delivery, as long as we double down on some of the strengths of each. And then for me, the skill, having run in-person events, and I certainly don't rule out doing them again in the future. I think it'd be smart for us to, but let's integrate them, right? Let's focus. What is it about in-person sort of networking and collaborating that we need to maximize, and what could be delivered as well, if not better, online? And let's integrate those styles. Let's lean into what is strongest in each discipline. That's the thing that most interests me. Absolutely. And so, do I think they've got legs? Was the question. Typically long answer from me. Yes, I do. But I think that they will burn out. Those that are just trying to peddle one topic, death by slideshow over Zoom screen share, I hope they die out. It's just a digital version of crap education that occurs in an in-person event or webinar, or lecture or what have you. Done badly or poorly moderated discussions. Like, oh, we've got a panel. It's like that hasn't had a brief and hasn't been set properly. It's just poor digital education, which, I'm not saying I don't succumb to some of the mistakes sometimes, or my team don't always get it right, but we do as best. And we've really been studying this for 7 years now for being better digital educators, and then translating that to in-person education when we've done events, etc., and creating quality content. Like we've been sharpening those tools over the course of years, and then we're able to flex them into this space just as everyone tries to turn this way. And so I'm pleased that we feel that we've got quality and quantity. So see if you agree. See if anyone's been, feel free to, by the way, badmouth me on the chat. That's not a problem. Please do gob off if needs be. But I know we're coming towards the end of time there, and it's nearly 1 o'clock. So many thanks for those of you that tuned in live, and those that then visit after the fact. Those that tuned in live or will watch the video version of this broadcast after the fact will know that I had the twins. We had Test and Control here with us for the first 5 minutes or so. No, not my finest radio work, I don't think. I was rather distracted, but it's good to see them. And some of you have posted some lovely comments as they make up their 9 months old. Certainly affected our life in many ways, all of which positive, apart from sleep. It's been a challenge. But what I would say is that today we've visited 3 key questions that have come in recently that's piqued my interest. There's lots more we haven't been able to get to, so please do continue to send them over to us in whatever format, especially if you're then suggesting questions, or if you're suggesting themes or guests for tuning it over, then please do let us know. It's always really valuable to get your feedback, and we've got some brilliant guests coming up soon. On Thursday, I'll be joined by Adam Meekins. He was meant to be here today. I mentioned that yesterday. I'm sorry he's not. He's coming in on Thursday to talk a little bit about his latest rant about marketing coaches. I'm not sure. He better not stand me up on Thursday as well, but he's going to be coming in Thursday. Tomorrow, Matthew Wyatt's joining me to talk a little bit about some MSKR news that you might see this afternoon, which is exciting. We've got an event for our birthday event for that on FCP, so do join us there. I will see you tomorrow with Matthew, but otherwise, thanks a lot. Have a great day, and do keep your questions coming. Hope you've enjoyed that little Ask Me Anything. Let's see if I can remember how to get me line up my sign out. I'm always smooth as ever. And yeah, see you tomorrow.